Beep, 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 beep. Welcome, Jester News. All that's new and approved from the Jester News. So here we go, right? Okay. Let's talk about a rather marvellous lady called Janet Daly. Now, if you've not come across Janet Daly before, I've seen her speak a number of times, and she's a force of nature at times, is Janet, and she's being a force of nature in this particular article that I've come across, which came across my virtual desk. And I thought, you know, Janet, you're a big thinker. It's great to see people that can do this, okay? So I thought I'd take you through it. I'll put the link to the article in the Dubris below, he says, right? And it's an article entitled, "Free Societies Can't Survive the Elevation of Feelings into Facts." Oh, Janet, I love you already. Yeah, see? Janet Daly hitting the nail on the head. I've said this before and I'll say it again. When it comes to your emotions and your feelings, when they come knocking at the door, let them in the front door, let them out the back door. Just don't sit down and have lunch with them, okay? Because they just a waste of time, really. Janet, this is born of, Sturgeon's burgeoning failure, right? Okay, so the great Scottish question of the day: whether a trans rapist should be sent to a women's prison. Could you believe that's in the highlight? It's the first line in the Telegraph. Has given rise to much triumphal hilarity. What triumphal hilarity? I'm going to use that more often than I do currently. The obvious absurdity of the case and the bizarre decision by Nicola Sturgeon to choose to defend what is clearly indefensible on grounds which are logically contradictory has delivered what seems to be a fatal blow to both gender self-identification and to the Sturgeon party leadership. Two birds, one stone. What a paragraph. But these assumptions, which are probably correct, I'm with you on this one, Janet, may lead to a dangerously over-optimistic conclusion that because the trans lobby, militant trans lobby, is at its epicenter, and politicians who defend it put themselves in mortal danger, we can now expect the whole woke edifice to collapse. Now, I've had this conversation with some of my GC and RF friends about the isolation of gender identity, which we fight, is very important, but we must never forget. And Janet is going to tell you what we should never forget. The principle that if you feel you are a woman, then you actually are a woman, and the world must acknowledge that in official terms, is just a peculiarly striking example of this kind of madness. And she says that comes from lived experience. So listen to what she says. It is very important to understand that the demands of the trans activists to define as whatever they choose to be is a small tributary of a much larger cultural shift in our agreed understanding of what is real. Again and again, in myriad forms and from widely differing sections of society, come the iterations of this new received wisdom. You notice the word iteration. That's a relatively new word. We're seeing it more in vocabulary now. It's like, Windows 7, Windows 8.1, Windows 10, a new iteration thereof, punctuated equilibrium being described here. The only truth that matters is what you feel, your lived experience, which we know is nonsense because experience is not a good teacher. The principle that if you feel that you're a woman, you are a woman. That kind of idea is what she's talking about. And much more frequent and legally problematic, what comes out of this nonsense, is of course that cases involve hate speech and professional bullying, which we've seen and was one of the precursors to the Reindorf report from Akua Reindorf. As the law is currently interpreted, you are a genuine victim of hate or abuse if you believe that you are. Well, that's a nonsense and that's got to stop, which is why hate crimes have to go. If you interpret what is said to you as hurtful, prejudiced or unfair, you are by definition correct, because your emotional response to what happens to you is the indisputable measure of what actually did happen. There is no distinction any longer between subjective and objective truth. That's right. Yes, okay? That's why you have to get the word feel out of your vocabulary. I said it to somebody the other week. What do you think? And they went, I feel, and started rabbiting. And I went, okay, right, well, after 30 seconds, right, try again. What do you think? And she looked really glazed over, like a sheep sleep. And then said to me, oh my God. And I said, what? She said, I can't remember the last time I'd have thought. There you go, right? Feelings and emotions aren't to be celebrated. They're to be dealt with and put to one side. Okay? Experience isn't a good teacher. It's no good unless it's washed through other things. It is impossible to overstate the importance of this change, continues Janet. It shifts the ground on which modern society and the rule of law have relied. It makes a nonsense of the idea of evidence and proof. It gives the accuser powers that were once associated with witch hunts. I still associate them with witch hunts, Janet. It's the same thing. It's the same human behaviour. Nothing can count as disproof of an allegation or of emotional cruelty or discrimination, because the only test of whether they occurred is the testimony of the person who felt they had occurred. Believe the victim. I wonder where that came from. They say there is no way of establishing whether these feelings are justified, nor could there be, because the feelings themselves are sufficient to constitute guilt. If I am hurt by what you said, then you are ipso facto legally responsible for hurting me. This is preposterous, says Janet, and morally dangerous, but it is now the day-to-day business of countless industrial tribunals and lawsuits. You might think that this is an offshoot of the egoism which has dominated modern European thinking. I think she's saying about the individual there, the idea of the individual there. This is nothing more than the logical conclusion that it is nothing more than the logical conclusion of the Romantic tradition, in which narcissistic individualism finally reaches its end game. I'm a great believer in the individual, the sanctity of the individual. I think saying narcissistic individualism finally reaches its end game is an interesting statement. But oddly, this cult does not really elevate the individual over every other consideration. I don't think Janet's necessarily a fan of individualism in any form. So, Janet, you may be suffering from unconscious leftism. Sorry, Janet, I'm kidding. In fact, there is quite strict order of merit in which your hurt or grievance or allegation of injustice only counts if you're a member of an identifiable disadvantaged group through ethnic or sexual identity, say, or being a sufferer from disability. She's talking about intersectionality. So far she's pointed the finger at intersectionality, right? Okay, believe the victim. Janet, you could upset some people. We love. Fabulous, keep at it, right? Okay. What she's saying is essentially that we reward helplessness and victimhood. And you enter then a state as an individual of victim status. It doesn't matter what happens to you. If you want to be a victim, be a victim. It doesn't matter how bad what happens to you happens to you. I've told you before about Eva Core. What a wonderful woman she was, and what a wonderful advocate for removing victimhood status from yourself before you enter a stage of victim stasis. Right? Victim status, which is essentially like being you'd be Ripley in Aliens, except you wouldn't have fought shit and you're in the cryo chamber forever. Victim stasis. It is only helplessness and victimhood which are rewarded as legitimate forms of individualism. So in essence, what she's saying is that there is nothing individualistic about this. This is not about individualism at all. It's about group membership and group victimhood. And she's absolutely right. She's absolutely right. Absolutely right. I am what I feel is the definition of truth, rather than I am what I can do. Indeed, taking pride in what you are capable of is the last thing the ideology would choose to venerate, because rewarding people on their merits is seen as ruthless. Don't you love Janet? Let's find her on Twitter and give her some love. We love Janet, right? Okay. It promotes talent and effectiveness which are not evenly distributed, and which must therefore be inherently unfair. So we're back to equity. We can't have talented people. No. There was a great scene. There was a film years ago called Baron Munchausen, which I loved. I think I've said this before. And Sting was an officer that had sort of fought the army, and he'd taken down an entire battalion on his own, and they brought him before the mad nutter that was running the army. And he said, take him out and shoot him. We can't have people setting an example like that. That's this. Okay, that's this. And then she goes on to discuss, how did we get here? When did febrile, mercurial, untestable personal reaction to events become empirical facts? Somehow the truths of the imagination, which are a natural part of human experience and which have their own standards of reality, are now being put forward as the basis for law and political order. Who could not see that this undermines the most fundamental principles of justice, that there must be objective standards for truth, even in the contentious matters of personal behaviour? It is almost impossible to believe that we have arrived at this point where the test of what is real is simply a matter of how you feel at a given moment, and most dangerously, where your feelings are only worthy of consideration if you belong to a deserving group. Whatever this is, it is not reverence for the individual, and it is certainly not justice. It's certainly not justice. I had what was probably one of the best sessions with my warrior teachers I've ever had the other night. It was absolutely brilliant. You know, when you get a moment, and I can tell it was good because it went on for 3.5 hours, and at least 3 of us got pissed off. Because we were having conversations that were really on the nub of some things. And there was great discussion, for example, around pornography, with some excellent points raised by everybody. And we talked about how we're going to talk about pornography and what is going to be the framework to understand it on the back of a brilliant article by Dr. M, which incidentally I'll put that in the Dubris just so you can have a look at that as well. So there was a very good conversation around pornography and the complexity of that issue and how it ties into technology. And there was some really challenging stuff going on, which of course is why people become a warrior teacher in the first place. If you're looking for a safe space, boy, have you picked the wrong place to be. So that was really, really interesting. But what was also interesting was that we came across a subject which I think you can expect to hear a lot more of, because I'm beginning to hear it in the cultural smoking room, right? And that is the concept of the toxic mother. Toxic matriarchy, okay? And people go, there's no such thing. I mentioned this before the other day. I think we're going to hear a lot more about this, because I think that the reason that we've got where we are is because we have a situation where what we would see to be the feminine attributes have actually taken too strong a hold in our organisations, and particularly in our public sector and in the NHS. Well, this is going to be a knife's edge job, isn't it? Because there's going to be a lot of angry folk. There shouldn't be. We should be able to discuss this. Why have we turned businesses into creches? Why have we turned NHSs into creches? Why are we making people eternal victims that need a parental figure to look after them? Why have we done that? What's happened in our society in the last 50 years that means that we've done that? Gosh. Oh my. And there'll be those on the right will go, it's women. It's all because of the women. It's all because of the women. You think it's only women that possibly can be toxically matriarchal? Then you're mad. Because matriarchy and patriarchy aren't about women. They aren't about women. They're about gender. And matriarchy and patriarchy are about the fact that there are distinct ideas of what women are like and distinct ideas of what men are like. And they are embedded in our society. Is there such a thing as toxic patriarchy? Said it the other day, yes. Is there such a thing as toxic matriarchy? This is a conversation we're going to have, right? And it's coming. Because, take some responsibility, folks. I'm going to keep saying this until somebody goes, come and talk to me about pornography. Right? Let's talk about it, okay? Let's talk about what's going on, right? Businesses are there to make money. Public services are there to provide a service, and the NHS is there to make people better. I bet you I could give you a list of 20 things that I think are about matriarchy, and if we took them out of all those organisations, everything would go back to being normal. Anybody want to take up the challenge and try and guess what those 20 things might be? We'll do 10, it's easier. Anybody? Anyone want to take a challenge? I think it's fascinating. I think it's a conversation we've got to start having. And I think it's a conversation we've certainly got to start having between gay men and radical feminists. And we should be speaking to women who are feminists who don't see themselves as radical. We should be talking to everybody about this. We've got to start saying to ourselves, at what point do we leave the mothering at home? And by that, I don't mean women. I mean mothering in a gendered sense, in the sense of what it is to be a woman, which is a nonsense, because there's no such thing. You're just a human being like the rest of us. But what tendencies do we see within the idea of a woman, and what tendencies do we see within the idea of a man on a grand scale, looking at this from the point of view of statehood? Is what we are seeing a direct result of women entering the workplace? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it's a question we need to ask, and I think we need to say, what's happened? Because when I first started working, and there weren't many women in the workplace, my God, they were horrible places. I used to have bosses that used to pinch you. They pinch my arm and make me go black. Just do the fucking job. All that kind of really vile, that sort of overt, vile, patriarchal type of thing. That terrible, that awful grasping of the father, the violent father figure. Yeah. Now we've got, they're there, go see HR, here's a tissue. You don't want to tell me the pendulum's not gone too far? Our task is to discuss this rather strange cultural phenomenon and find out how we can, now we've got lots of records and we've got lots of ways of looking at things and we've got lots of ways of seeing the cultural artefacts that have brought us to where we are. It's a great time to have the discussion about, hang on a minute, where should that be, that pendulum? Is your workplace responsible for the fact that you're not thinking straight? No, they're not. Right, go and see your doctor. Where? What should we be saying about what workplaces should be and what people should expect? At what point does doing the job get replaced by mothering, or doing the job gets replaced by fathering, i.e. the toxically matriarchal or the toxically patriarchal? Let's have the conversation. That's not to say that the idea of patriarchy doesn't exist. It does, right? We've had matriarchal societies in the past. That's different. I'm not talking about the idea of the central patriarchy, which of course it was because women entered the workplace, which had been run by men for years. I'm not saying it's toxic either, because that's nonsense, because competency got us here, right? But let's have the conversation. It's time. Let's look at it and see what's happened. Have we allowed the feminine of gender to overtake the masculine of gender, and in doing so, to simply cause a different problem? I'm very excited about this cultural phenomenon, and I hope you are too. It'd be a great thing to discuss, a great thing to try and iron out and see how we can go back and get back on the right path. So thanks for that great article, Janet. It was a brilliant article. So please do go and read. And again, let me know what you think in the doobries, in the, the old comments, and becoming a warrior teacher. And okay, that's enough waffle. I'll see you later. Bye.